In the brutal world of 1970s and 80s football, where toughness was the only currency that mattered, few men struck fear into opponents like Lyle Alzado. He wasn't just aggressive, he was a storm of pure rage, a walking explosion waiting to happen. His hits didn't just stop players, they sent them flying. His eyes burned with an intensity that made even the toughest men hesitate. But what fueled this relentless warrior? What drove him to tear through offensive lines like a wrecking ball and lash out at anyone who stood in his way, even his own teammates? Alzado's story is one of raw talent, unchecked fury, and tragic consequences. He lived by the sword and, in many ways, died by it too. Today, we're uncovering the untold story of Lyle Alzado, the Raiders' most feared enforcer, a man who took football's violence to a terrifying new level. The rise of a warrior, a tough beginning. Lyle Alzado wasn't born into greatness, he was born into struggle. His childhood in Brooklyn, New York was anything but easy. Growing up in a rough neighborhood, he learned early that survival meant fighting, both figuratively and literally. A broken home and a burning rage. His father, an abusive and unpredictable man, ruled the house with an iron fist. Lyle lived in constant fear, but that fear slowly turned into anger. Then one day his father walked out on the family, disappearing without a trace. Instead of relief, Lyle felt abandoned. That anger inside him only grew stronger. With no father figure to guide him, he found his role models in the streets. He got into fights, ran with the wrong crowd, and clashed with authority. But there was one thing that gave him an escape: football. Finding football and his true identity. In high school, football became his outlet. On the field, all the rage, frustration, and pain turned into pure aggression. He wasn't the most skilled player, but he made up for it with relentless intensity. Coaches took notice. He hit harder than anyone else, played with reckless abandon, and refused to back down from anyone. But talent wasn't enough. His grades were terrible, and colleges weren't interested in a kid with academic issues and a history of street fights. His dream of playing in the NFL was slipping away before it even started. Yet, in true Alzado fashion, he refused to quit. He was about to take the first step on a long, brutal journey that would make him one of the most feared players in football history. The college struggles, fighting for a chance. Lyle Alzado had the heart of a warrior, but heart alone wasn't enough to get him into a big football program. His poor grades, combined with his reputation for being a troublemaker, made him an afterthought for most colleges. The NFL dream he clung to was slipping further away. But if there was one thing about Alzado, it was that he never gave up. Dreams crushed before they could begin. Growing up, Lyle dreamed of playing for a powerhouse football school, hoping it would be his ticket to the pros. When New Mexico State offered him a scholarship, he thought his future was finally set. But in a cruel twist of fate, the offer was rescinded because of his academic struggles. Just like that, he was back to square one. Rejected, humiliated, and out of options, Alzado refused to accept failure. He needed another shot, and he was willing to take whatever came his way. That opportunity came from an unlikely place: Yankton College, a tiny school in South Dakota that no one in the football world cared about. The unlikely opportunity at Yankton College. Yankton College wasn't a Division I school, nor was it a football powerhouse. It didn't have top-tier facilities or national scouts watching from the sidelines. For most players, it was a dead end. But for Alzado, it was the only chance he had left. Instead of feeling sorry for himself, he embraced it. He trained harder than anyone else, spending hours in the gym, lifting weights until his muscles burned. Football wasn't enough. He also took up boxing and bodybuilding, pushing his body to its absolute limit. It was during this time that he was introduced to steroids. Desperate to get stronger, faster, and more dominant, he started experimenting with performance-enhancing drugs. He had no idea this decision would eventually lead to his downfall. Catching the NFL's attention, Alzado's dominance on the field at Yankton was impossible to ignore. He played like a man possessed, racking up tackles, punishing quarterbacks, and making scouts take notice. Against all odds, he was about to get the break of a lifetime. The NFL was finally watching. The unexpected break in the NFL, from nowhere to the big leagues. Lyle Alzado had no business making it to the NFL. Not by traditional standards. He wasn't from a top football program, he wasn't a highly scouted prospect, and he had zero connections in the league. But sometimes all it takes is one lucky break. A chance discovery by the Denver Broncos. In 1971, the Denver Broncos were scouting a different player from Montana Tech. While reviewing game footage, a coach's eyes were drawn to someone else, a relentless defensive lineman from a small unknown school. That player was Lyle Alzado. The Broncos weren't looking for him, yet they couldn't ignore his aggression, power, and motor. Despite playing at tiny Yankton College, Alzado's on-field dominance was impossible to overlook. The long-shot draft pick. NFL teams weren't in the habit of drafting guys from nowhere, but Denver took a gamble. In the fourth round of the 1971 NFL draft, Lyle Alzado's name was called. He wasn't a first-rounder, wasn't a golden boy prospect, he was just a guy with a chip on his shoulder, and something to prove. Most fourth-round picks don't make it past training camp. They get lost in the shuffle, overshadowed by bigger names. But Alzado was different. He showed up angrier, stronger, and more determined than anyone else, proving he belonged. From the moment he stepped on the practice field, it was clear Alzado wasn't going anywhere. He was relentless, throwing himself into every tackle, playing like every snap could be his last. His teammates laughed at his wild energy at first, but they quickly learned he wasn't a joke. By the time the season started, Alzado had earned a starting role. His rookie year was a statement to the league. He wasn't just another late-round pick. He was a force of nature, the beast on the field, a nightmare for opponents. Lyle Alzado didn't just play football, he waged war on the field. From the moment he lined up, his opponents knew they were in for a long, brutal game. He wasn't just another defensive lineman. He was a one-man wrecking crew, a relentless force of destruction. His mission? To dominate, intimidate, and leave a trail of destruction behind him. A reputation built on fear. Alzado played the game with unmatched aggression. He didn't just tackle quarterbacks, he tried to break them. He didn't just block linemen, he bulldozed them. Every play was a battlefield, and he made sure everyone knew he was the most dangerous man on it. His opponents dreaded him, not just because of his power, but because he played with no limits. He threw punches in piles, grabbed face masks, and slammed players into the turf long after the whistle blew. He didn't care about penalties, he cared about making a statement. Even his own teammates feared him in practice. Coaches had to warn players to watch out for Lyle because he hit just as hard in training as he did in games. Trash talk and mind games. Alzado wasn't just a physical monster, he was a psychological assassin. He knew how to break opponents mentally before he even touched them. He would walk up to offensive linemen and whisper, "You think you're tough? I'll end your career today." He'd tell quarterbacks, "You're not getting up after I hit you." And more often than not, he made good on his threats. He once chased an opposing quarterback into the tunnel after a sack, just to remind him that there was no escape from Lyle Alzado. The fine line between passion and madness, Alzado's fire burned so intensely that sometimes it consumed him. His violent outbursts got him ejected from games, fined by the league, and even suspended. But he didn't care. In his mind, he was playing the game the way it was meant to be played, without fear, without mercy. Some called him a warrior, others called him a madman, but everyone respected him. The steroid-fueled rise and fall. Lyle Alzado had always been a beast, but as he climbed higher in the NFL, he wanted more. More strength, more power, more dominance. He refused to be just another great player. He wanted to be unstoppable, and to do that, he turned to something that would both elevate him to greatness and ultimately destroy him: steroids, the secret weapon. Alzado first experimented with steroids in college, but in the NFL, they became an addiction. He saw them as his secret weapon, the edge that allowed him to overpower anyone in his way. His strength became unreal, his body transformed, and his aggression reached new heights. But with every gain in muscle, he lost control. A time bomb waiting to explode. With steroids pumping through his system, Alzado became more violent than ever. He wasn't just tackling players, he was attacking them. His rage became uncontrollable. He threw helmets at teammates, got into fistfights with coaches, and once even tried to strangle an opponent on the field. His outbursts didn't go unnoticed. Fans and reporters whispered about his unnatural size, his explosive anger, and the wild look in his eyes. But in an era where the NFL turned a blind eye to performance-enhancing drugs, Alzado kept pushing the limits. The NFL's silent problem. The league knew steroids were a problem, but they had no real policies in place. Players across the NFL were using them, but no one wanted to talk about it. And Alzado, he was the poster boy for what steroids could do, both in power and destruction. His body was changing faster than anyone thought possible. He was stronger, but also more fragile. His joints ached, his injuries worsened, and his mood swings became extreme. The man who once felt invincible was starting to fall apart. The move to the Raiders. Lyle Alzado had built a reputation as one of the most feared defenders in the league, but by the early 1980s, he felt unwanted. After years of dominance, he was traded from Denver to Cleveland, a move that left him angry and bitter. But destiny had one final stop for him: the Raiders, the team that didn't just tolerate his intensity, but embraced it. A short-lived stint in Cleveland. Alzado never truly fit in with the Browns. He still played at an elite level, but something was missing. His trademark aggression was there, but the fire in his eyes dimming. Injuries began creeping in, and whispers of his body breaking down grew louder. He was still feared, still dominant, but the Browns weren't willing to bet on him for the long haul. Then came the move that changed everything. Al Davis takes a gamble. In 1982, Raiders owner Al Davis saw something in Alzado that others had overlooked. He saw a warrior with something to prove. And if there was one place in the NFL built for players like him, rebels, outcasts, misfits, it was the Raiders. Davis brought Alzado to Los Angeles, a city of glitz and chaos, a perfect match for a man who thrived on both. From the moment he put on the silver and black, Alzado was reborn. The Raider mentality. With the Raiders, Alzado didn't didn't have to hold back. He didn't have to tone down his aggression or play by the rules. This was a team that celebrated violence, that dared the league to stop them. And Alzado, he thrived. The Super Bowl moment, the peak of his career, came in Super Bowl 18. The Raiders dominated Washington, and Alzado finally had what he had always wanted, a championship ring. He stood on the biggest stage in football, not just as a player, but as a legend. But even in his moment of triumph, the cracks were beginning to show. His body, ravaged by years of steroid abuse and relentless violence, was nearing its breaking point. The Muhammad Ali fight. Lyle Alzado had conquered the NFL, but he wasn't satisfied. Deep down, he craved something bigger, something that would cement his reputation as the most fearless athlete in the world. And in his mind, there was only one way to do that: fight Muhammad Ali, the challenge that shocked the world. In 1979, at the peak of his football career, Alzado did something no NFL player had ever done before. He challenged the greatest boxer of all time. The announcement left people stunned. A football player fighting Muhammad Ali? It sounded like madness, but Alzado didn't see it that way. To him, it was simple. He had spent his entire life fighting, on the streets, in bars, on the football field. This was just another fight, and Ali, he laughed. He saw Alzado as just another tough guy trying to make a name for himself. The fight night spectacle. On July 14, 1979, at Mile High Stadium, the fight was set. Over 20,000 people filled the stands expecting a spectacle. The fight was billed as an exhibition, but to Alzado, this was war. From the opening bell, it was clear. Alzado was no trained boxer. His punches were wild, his movements sloppy, but what he lacked in skill, he made up for in raw power and unrelenting aggression. For 8 grueling rounds, Alzado charged at Ali, swinging with everything he had, and to the shock of many, he held his own. Ali's surprising praise. By the end of the fight, there was no official winner, but Alzado had earned something just as valuable: Muhammad Ali's respect. After the fight, Ali admitted, "That man hits harder than most real fighters." Coming from the greatest boxer of all time, that was no small compliment. For Alzado, this wasn't just about stepping in the ring. It was about proving that he was more than just a football player, that he could go toe-to-toe with the best in the world and still stand tall. But this fight also marked the beginning of the end. His obsession with power, with proving his toughness, would soon come at a devastating price. The price of power. Lyle Alzado had spent his entire life proving he was the toughest man in the room. On the field, in the ring, and in the gym, he had built himself into a warrior. But at what cost? Behind the scenes, his obsession with strength had spiraled out of control, and now his body was starting to break. The steroid spiral. Alzado had used steroids for years, but after his fight with Muhammad Ali, his reliance on them intensified. He wasn't just using them to stay competitive anymore. He was chasing a myth, an image of himself that could never last. He became more aggressive, more erratic. He picked fights with teammates, screamed at reporters, and even attacked a fan who taunted him. The man who once controlled his rage was now a prisoner to it. But the worst part, he couldn't stop. He feared that without steroids, he would fade into irrelevance. The breaking point. By the early 1980s, Alzado's body started to betray him. Years of steroid abuse had taken their toll. His joints ached, his muscles tore, and his once unbreakable frame began to crumble. Despite the pain, he refused to slow down. He played through excruciating injuries, relying on painkillers just to step onto the field. But deep down, he knew he wasn't the same warrior anymore. The final blow came in 1985. At 36 years old, Alzado was forced to retire. His body simply couldn't take it anymore. And just like that, the unstoppable force was stopped. Retirement and regret. At first, Alzado tried to live a normal life. He dabbled in acting, took up coaching, and even spoke out against steroid use. But the damage had already been done. His health deteriorated rapidly. His once massive frame shrank, his strength vanished, and his energy faded. The warrior who had spent his entire life fighting suddenly had no more battles left to win. But the biggest fight of his life was still ahead, one he couldn't win. The tragic end. Lyle Alzado had spent his life fighting battles against opponents, against expectations, and against his own limitations. But in the end, the greatest fight of all wasn't on the football field. It was against his own body. And this time, it was a fight he couldn't win. The diagnosis that shocked the world. In 1991, just 6 years after his retirement, Alzado received devastating news. He had a brain tumor. The doctors diagnosed him with primary central nervous system lymphoma, a rare and aggressive cancer. Alzado was convinced he knew the cause: steroids. For years, he had pushed his body beyond its natural limits. He had injected himself with anything that could make him bigger, faster, stronger. But now his past was catching up with him in the most brutal way imaginable. He went public with his story, confessing everything. He admitted to years of steroid abuse and warned young athletes against following his path. "If you play with fire, you're going to get burned," he said in one heartbreaking interview. But for Alzado, the fire had already consumed him. A warrior reduced to a shadow, the once mighty defender who had terrified quarterbacks and bullied offensive linemen now struggled to walk without assistance. His muscle mass vanished, his energy drained, and the fight that had once defined him slowly slipped away. Still, he refused to go down without swinging. He underwent experimental treatments, chemotherapy, and radiation. He did everything he could to turn back the clock, but the clock never stops ticking. By early 1992, it was clear Alzado was losing. The warrior who had once stood tall in the trenches of the NFL was now frail, weak, and fading. On May 14th, 1992, Lyle Alzado took his last breath. He was only 43 years old. A legacy of strength and caution. Lyle Alzado was remembered as one of the fiercest competitors the NFL had ever seen. A Super Bowl champion, a Raider legend, a man who redefined toughness. But his death left behind a chilling warning. Was the cost of greatness worth it? He had played the game like a warrior, but in the end, the battle he fought within himself was the one that truly defined him. And for generations to come, his story would serve as a lesson, one that could not be ignored. The legacy of Lyle Alzado. Lyle Alzado was a man of contradictions, a warrior and a warning, a hero and a tragedy. His story is one that can't be ignored because it forces us to ask the hard questions. Was Alzado a legend who pushed himself beyond human limits? Or was he a cautionary tale of what happens when the price of greatness is too high? His impact on the game is undeniable. He helped define what it meant to play like a Raider, tough, relentless, fearless. But his downfall exposed the dangers lurking beneath the surface of professional sports. So now we turn to you. What do you think about Lyle Alzado's legacy? Was he a true icon, or did his steroid use taint his career? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear from you. And if you love deep dives into the greatest and most controversial figures in Raiders history, make sure to check out our other videos. There's so much more to uncover. Hit that like button, subscribe for more, and we'll see you in the next one. Because the story of the Raiders, it never truly ends.